I'm going to hand this back to Chris, who's going to chair the panel and introduce our panelists. So Chris, over to you.
Great, thank you, Peter. A good start to the presentation and the event, and it's certainly food for thought. We've actually got 4 expert panelists that live and work in the Forest of Dean, and I'm going to just give you a brief intro to all of them so that you know where they're coming from. So we've got Suzanne Hemingway. Suzanne is the Corporate Director of Operations for Two Rivers Housing. Having joined the organisation in August, she is new to the Forest of Dean and keen to learn more about and be part of the community response to climate change. Before joining Two Rivers Housing, Suzanne worked in Cambridgeshire, leading on work to improve council housing, increase energy efficiency of new housing, and change the council fleet, including its waste trucks, to electric vehicles. Many of you will know Kevin Stannard. Kevin is a professional forester, having joined the Forestry Commission straight from university in 1992. Kevin moved to the Dean in 2010, taking on the role of Deputy Surveyor, the senior officer of the forestry here. As well as being Deputy Surveyor, he is also Director of the West England district that stretches from Shrewsbury to Salisbury Plain to Land's End. We've got Kieran Hyman. Kieran manages the local capacity support service and team at the Southwest Energy Hub. The hub works with organisations and communities across the Southwest to identify, develop and implement low carbon energy projects. And last but not least, we've got Tim Rickard. Tim has worked in social services, in publishing and in television, where he made documentary films mainly about natural history and the environment. He is a long-standing member of Transition Nuent and project director of Dimmock Forest Rural Action. Those are your panelists. Thank you. Peter, do you want to take it from here, or do you want me to give them a chance to give their 5-minute presentations?
Yeah, if you can invite them.
Okay. In no particular order then. Can we start with Kevin Stannard? Floor's yours.
Good morning. Hopefully you can see the slides. I've already jumped ahead far too far in pressing those buttons. Let's go back.
Yeah, all good with the slides.
Right. Good morning to you. 5 minutes to save the planet, impossible job. So this will be light on detail, fast on narrative. So stick with us. Any questions? I've got another couple of years ahead to answer those, so don't try and get them from this presentation. Why trees are a hot topic. There are other universities other than Exeter working in this field. The picture is a University of Birmingham massive experiment. They're actually pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, probably counterintuitive, but they're actually doing a long-term study here to work out how trees react to a higher carbon environments, how woodlands react to higher carbon environments. Why trees are a hot topic. They take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and produce oxygen. They lock that carbon in cellulose, essentially in the timber and in the leaves. The leaves fall to the floor and lock it into the soil. There's a whole day seminar on that, but we've only got 1 second to do that bit. So trees respond to carbon in enriched atmospheres by growing faster, which is good. So the more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, as far as this experiment shows anyway at the moment, the more oxygen is produced and the more carbon gets taken out again. So at the moment, we're not expecting the trees to respond other than growing faster as the climate warms. To give that some numbers, 54 million tonnes of carbon is thought to be locked in Forestry England's forests. So that's just the woodlands looked after by the Forestry Commission within England. And we produce 1 million tonnes of timber sustainably each year. Now that 1 million tonne of timber is not 1 million tonne of carbon, but it does give you an indication of the relative volumes that we're producing. Carbon's a difficult thing because if you plant, gone ahead too quickly there, but never mind. If you plant a small tree in an open clearing, it's only going to take in a very small amount of carbon. The majority of our trees mid-life are putting on carbon, producing timber, taking carbon out of the atmosphere far faster and more reliably. And when they get to this old age, veteran, hugely important for biodiversity, that old veteran tree is probably releasing more carbon into the atmosphere than taking it out. There's a lot of dead wood there that, as it breaks down, releases carbon. So woodlands need to be managed to maximize their carbon storage, is what I'm saying there, basically. The total UK forest carbon stock is estimated to be 630 million tons of carbon. Wow, huge number. Probably slightly out of date figure, 2018, but actually we as a country emitted 509 million tons of carbon. So we're emitting every year almost as much carbon into the atmosphere as is locked up in our entire forest stock. That must surely be a sobering thought. Huge push for planting trees to save the planet. I love planting trees, but let's look at the reality here. You need to plant at least 2.5 million hectares of new woodland a year to compensate for 1 year's emissions. And that is ignoring the fact that it's going to take a good 15 to 20 years before those trees you plant today are actually soaking up enough carbon to have that impact. That's also fine, but you very quickly run out of land. So a modeling that our forest research colleagues did, you can start planting today to offset the UK's carbon emissions. And if you've got enough planters and enough trees, you can do that this year, you can do it next year, following year, you run out of land. So no, planting trees are not going to save the planet. The government target for tree planting is actually only 30,000 hectares a year. So nobody in government is saying we're going to plant trees and that stops us cutting carbon emissions because it will soak up all of that. Move on. Warmer equals wetter. As we've seen, fewer days of rainfall are forecast. That rainfall will be heavier with increasingly more extreme rainfall events. Flooding is going to be the new reality. But the flip side of that, we're going to have more periods of drought, and we can expect more prolonged and intense periods of drought associated with more extremes of heat. That can be devastating for trees, for the biodiversity that lives in woods. That water stress in the soil is something often overlooked, but has immense impacts on the health of our trees. You can debate the figures and it depends which scenario you use, but by 2060 in the Forest of Dean, we are likely to have 40% less rainfall and 25% more rainfall in a medium emission scenario. That is drastic for the wildlife, for the trees that already live here. What's the impact on trees? Death. This is an oak tree, one of a huge number of oak trees in the Forest of Dean that are dying because of acute oak decline. It's slightly out of focus, but that wee little grub there is the Agralis beetle grub. It's now definitively proven that the spread of acute oak decline in central England, southern and central England, is down to the numbers of days of frost decreasing, which is allowing this grub to spread, and it's killing our trees. There's almost no oak tree left in Chestnuts Wood on the far side of the forest. They're all dead because of this. It's not just the Agralis bug. We've got huge increases in viruses, bacteria, fungal pathogens. The ash dieback that you've seen significant impacts in the forest as we've taken out dead and dying ash trees, mainly from the roadsides to stop them falling on cars, is significant, hugely important. It comes back to water stress. The soil moisture changes kill root systems, and oak is particularly badly affected, the quintessential tree of the Forest of Dean. Oak hates rotating from dry soil to wet soil, waterlogged soil, the roots die. You don't necessarily in year 1, but year 2 or year 3 after a prolonged drought followed by a wet waterlogging season, the trees will just uproot because the root systems are gone. So what do we plant? You've got to bear in mind that the trees we plant today are still going to be around hopefully in 80 to 100 years' time. So we've got to be very careful about what we plant and why we plant it. Within forestry, we've got the ecological site classification tool, and this is just one for sessile oak, which was one of our native oaks. Now, basically, the green says the Forest of Dean is very suitable for sessile oak. By 2080, under a 2.7 degree rise in temperature, this is unsuitable for sessile oak. Won't necessarily mean all the oaks will be dead, sessile oaks will be dead, but they will be under extreme stress due to environmental change. Got a motto, right tree in the right place for the right reason. It's not as simple as just planting native or perpetuating traditional choices when it comes to tree planting. Our changing climate demands thought, innovation, and action. I'll just jump back. Let's show you that again without it. This is an oak tree with very healthy trees, and it's living in Westonbirt Arboretum in Gloucestershire, but it is not an English oak. It's an Italian one. If you go to Italy and have a look at their native oaks in their native range, they're suffering climate stress. So we need to be looking at other sources of trees to supplement what we're doing to make sure our forests are joined up, thriving in the future. Don't expect you to read this, but 10 years ago, 11 years ago, Professor John Lawton produced the Lawton Report, which is summarized bigger, better, and more joined up. Fundamentally, we need to be taking a landscape approach as well and joining up habitats across the landscape so that wildlife can move and that we can maximize climate mitigation across those. That again is a whole conference in its own right, so we'll skip that one. What is important? Doing something positive. Some nice words there about connecting people with the natural environment, sharing our understanding of natural landscapes, built environments, natural and cultural values, everything that we're doing. And by creating and caring for woods and forests for people, for wildlife for today and a different tomorrow. Nice words, but actually what is important? The overriding importance of cutting emissions as organizations, as individuals. God's sake, stop talking about it, start doing it. You can't plant trees to get out of this crisis. We've got to stop those emissions. Sorry, that was very fast paced, but five minutes to save the world, impossible job.
Thank you, Kevin. That was one of the most sobering presentations I've heard in quite a while, actually. It's the sort of presentation that needs to be communicated much more widely, and certainly to government and certainly to other councils and authorities, so that they understand the truth about forestry and how it might or might not get us out of a fix. Okay, I'd like to introduce Kieran Hyman from the Southwest Energy Hub. Kieran, the floor is yours to give a short presentation as well, please.
Thank you so much. I'll just share my screen and just say, yeah, that presentation on trees was absolutely fascinating. I thought that was really interesting. Right, hopefully you can see my slides.
Yeah.
Great. So my name's Kieran Hyman. I work at the Southwest Energy Hub. And I'm going to chat a little bit about how we can support the public sector and communities in identifying and developing sustainable energy projects. So moving from talking to doing. The energy hubs were set up using some central government funding. So there's regional hubs across the country, and we're a conduit between central government and the local councils and public sector, and the third sector and private sector. And our aim is to deliver energy projects, so to increase the number of them, the quality of them, to be a local leader, to attract investment, and to ensure there's collaboration so that we're not reinventing the wheel. And the Southwest Energy Hub, obviously Southwest is defined variously. The Southwest Energy Hub covers the Gloucestershire First LEP area, right the way down to Cornwall and Devon. So we cover quite a broad area, but different people have got different focuses. And we've got various services and programs that I'm going to chat to you a little bit about. So I'm going to chat to you about our support in local capacity, that's where I work, and some of our other funding streams. I've put there at the bottom, we were involved in the COP26 a little bit, so we were running some regional conversations and a zero carbon bus tour. Obviously that's closed, but I'll send these slides around so you can have a little look about some of the outcome of that conversation in your own time. So local capacity support, this is the team that I lead. We've got project managers across the Southwest. Broadly, we've got one for each LEP area. My colleague Louise, and I'll put her details in the chat, unfortunately couldn't join us today, but she's supporting the G1st LEP area. So she's getting to know some of the council people and communities and others involved in sustainable energy sector here. And we've got various project managers covering the rest of the Southwest. And we can support the public sector in identifying projects and developing initial feasibility, right the way through to designing and planning and developing the detailed business case, so that hopefully those public sector organisations can then procure and deliver these projects. So we're there to basically provide that unblocking support where organisations need that capacity building, need that little bit of support to overcome some of those blockers. That's what we're here to do and support. I've included some examples. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we cover the whole breadth of sustainable energy, from electric vehicles and hydrogen through to energy generation and domestic retrofit. And in the Forest of Dean, we're working with Dan and the council to look at potential sites for electric vehicle charging and different ownership options to encourage more sustainable transport. We also support community groups. So we run the Rural Community Energy Fund. This is where we provide grant funding for community groups. So we provide up to 40,000 for initial feasibility studies. And then for groups with more developed projects, we can provide up to 100,000. Since it was launched in May, we've delivered about 1.1 million of funding to try and unlock these projects and put communities at the heart of this energy transition. And there's a link there to our website with a bit more detail. I've included some rural community energy examples. There aren't any that I'm aware of in the Forest of Dean. I was aware of some work years ago looking at community energy in the Forest of Dean, but would welcome groups applying and just say those are mainly sort of solar focused. We have supported groups on wind and eco housing, and even looking at hydrogen and electric vehicle charging. As well as supporting the public sector by the local capacity support and supporting community groups by the Rural Community Energy Fund, we also support homeowners. So we were involved in securing the Green Homes grants, the local authority delivery Lab 2 scheme. So in layman's terms, this is grant funding for homeowners or people in rented accommodation wanting some insulation or renewable energy measures installed. There's about 50 million across the Southwest, and how it works is we work with local councils and delivery organisations who are responsible for managing the end-to-end customer journey, i.e. if you're a homeowner wanting some energy efficiency improvements, or your landlord is helping you deliver them, you would engage with one of these. And this scheme is for homes with poor energy efficiency, so those with an energy performance certificate rating of D or below, and of which there are quite a few in the Forest of Dean, and a majority of those are off-gas properties. And in the Forest of Dean and across the Gloucestershire area, there's an organisation called City Energy that is supporting this scheme. So I've included details there, and they're working across the Southwest in helping deliver some of these. I would say that this scheme has got quite challenging timescales, so it's closing March next year. So we're doing our best to move quickly, and with the funding we've got. Finally, the fourth strand of our work is public sector decarbonisation. So this is something that the local capacity support team was working on, but we're interviewing this week actually to put together a small little team, support public sector organisations in identifying and delivering projects across their estate, so energy efficiency as well as renewable energy. So we as the local capacity support team would be the sort of conduit for that team. And very finally, I realise I'm racing through my 5 minutes. Takeaways from COP26. So if this was a school report for me, it would say must try harder, but there is some positives. So I'm, optimistically positive that there is some change. I can see there's more and more countries committing to being net zero, more and more countries recognizing that they can't continue investing in delivering coal generation. But as Kevin said earlier, we need to be moving more towards delivery rather than talk. So I'm hoping that we can use some of this additional investment and momentum and build more positive change. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'm happy to take any questions now or at the end of the panel, and I realise I've raced through. But yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kieran. That was informative, and I think for many people it might have interested them to know that the funding is there, the expertise and the delivery mechanisms are there, and the support is there. Let's hope that we can, in the Forest of Dean, we can access those funds and that expertise quickly as the deadlines are quite short, as you said. Okay, I can't see many of you, but moving on to the next panelist, I'd like to give Suzanne Hemingway the floor to present what she's doing with Two Rivers Housing. Okay, Suzanne, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, Daniel's going to share my slides for me, hopefully. Fantastic. Just going to talk briefly about carbon challenge for housing. So if we go on to the next slide, we've already heard that the emissions in the UK, about 27% come from housing. So this is something that is tangible at a local level that we can do something about. I welcome all the talk about what government needs to do, but I think we need to focus on the actions that we can be taking locally as well. Most of that 28% comes from the heating of people's homes. And we need to focus on the fact that most of the houses we've got in the Forest of Dean today will still be standing when we get to 2050 or even 2060 or 2070. So as an organisation, we are looking at the quality of new homes and making sure that they are built to as close to net zero carbon as possible. But actually, we need to focus a lot of investment going into bringing up to standard the homes that we have in the forest. The 25 million homes that need to be retrofitted is a nationwide figure. And the government target around retrofitting homes is to reduce emissions to 60% of what they are, with the assumption that we'll continue to have some energy need, but the decarbonisation of the grid means we'll be able to access that through clean energy. Our focus is on really looking at the properties we've got and saying, what can we do and how far can we get these properties, how close to zero carbon? So next slide, please. We've done some analysis of the properties that we own, about 4,500 properties in the Forest of Dean, and more than half of those have an energy rating of D or below. That means that these homes are difficult to heat. They are mostly older homes. There's a slightly complicated relationship between them being difficult to heat and what that means in terms of cost to the user. And this is to the resident. This is one of the challenges we have in some parts of the country. Homes that are hard to heat are also expensive to heat because of the heating type they've got and the fact they've got poor insulation. In the forest, we do still have some homes that are not only off-grid and using oil, but where people have access to relatively inexpensive fuel, burning wood, things like that to heat their homes. So there is a risk that as we modernise homes, if we're not careful, we can make them more expensive rather than less expensive to heat. So our challenge is to make homes easier to keep warm, but also to do that in a way that it is possible for residents to be able to afford to keep them warm. The small number of properties that you can see on that chart that are rated A or B are mostly new build homes, and we're continuing to make sure that new build homes reach that higher standard. If I could have the next slide, please. What we're doing at Two Rivers Home Housing is to focus, well, first of all, on the government target of bringing everything up to an EPC-C, but we're currently planning how we go further than that. And we are doing some more detailed assessment of our homes to try to create a programme that will bring all of our homes up to A or B over time. This is really complicated in terms of finance. I've been in a number of national conferences where I've had different figures bandied around. Savills, who are a big surveying firm, talking about it's only going to cost on average about £17,000 or £20,000 per properties. Some of the larger housing associations who've got mostly newer stock will say it's only going to cost an average of maybe £25,000 or £30,000 a property. Based on what we know so far, for our stock, it's probably going to be more like £60,000 to £70,000 a home. It's a huge amount to find for a relatively small organisation, where our income stream is from the rents that we charge our residents, and we will be borrowing further to finance this. So it's a really challenging piece of work to be able to deliver this. What we're doing, and I'll come on to the government funding schemes in a moment, is we're working with government to use what funding is available, and working with other organisations to try to learn about which solutions work best, and to try to work to make those solutions more affordable for us and for other housing providers to install. We focus on the worst properties first. So we're looking at our properties that are rated E, F and G to bring them up to standard first, because those are the ones where residents are experiencing the most adverse effects and where the property is emitting the most carbon. The next thing we do is what's called fabric first, which is to say that the bulk of our expenditure and our efforts now are about insulating homes to make them retain the heat they've got. We already have some homes that have got new technologies installed for heating, photovoltaics, air source heat pumps, and those are great, but we can achieve greater reduction in carbon by getting people's homes insulated than we can by installing new technologies. So our first focus is going to be on getting the fabric of the properties as warm, as well insulated as we can. And we may well then go back later to change people's heating systems at a later stage of the programme. The least regrets is also, that's part of what the government requires in funding, and it's to say, let's not do things now that we might have to take out later. It's a bit like the conversation about what trees you plant now and looking ahead to the future. Let's not install things now that we think we're going to have to take out at a later stage of the programme. So if we could go on to the next slide. This is a shot of some properties that we are working on as part of the government's Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. We're in a partnership with that's led by Stroud Council and contains several other housing providers. That this particular fund, all the schemes have to be led by a council, and we're very happy to be working with them. We initially put 21 properties into the programme. We've reduced that now, and we're still not finalised as to exactly how many it's going to be, because we're working with residents about their acceptance of us doing this work to their homes. And as we've done the modelling, we've also found that the cost has been going up. These, you can see some of the properties are bungalows. Some of the other properties in the programme are houses. They're on a steep site, and there's real practical issues around how you insulate the homes. Bungalows have a very large amount of wall and roof compared per area of livable floor space compared to houses. So actually they're very expensive and difficult to insulate. We had hoped to be able to insulate the floors, and we found that the design of the properties means that in some of them we're not going to be able to insulate underneath the floors. And on each individual property, we have to look at what is there and what we can do to improve it. So I think the main thing I would say is it's a very useful learning experience for our team. We are working with other providers, and we're really happy to sort of share the more detailed technical stuff with anyone that's fascinated in such things. Next slide, please. Challenges we've encountered so far are just how expensive it is. These properties are coming out at around about £70,000 each. We're getting half of that from government in this funding wave, but we don't expect to get that amount of funding in all of the future waves. So there is going to be a real lack of resource to do it, and we're going to be working to find our way through. There are challenges around the capacity of industry to respond, and this is where we're keen to work with others to get more skilled contractors able to come in and deliver this kind of work. We're hoping to train some of our own team to be able to start delivering retrofit works. And as I've just said, the sustainability of solutions, looking at which solutions are appropriate for different kinds of property. This is a challenge for everyone that lives in a home. I'm talking about this from the perspective of the landlord that owns the homes and trying to improve them for our residents. But we have to work really closely with our residents about what works for them. And other speakers have spoken about behaviour change. We've got a real difficult conversation about how far we can go in encouraging behaviour change to more sustainable options. Where we've installed technologies in some other homes, people have struggled to adjust how they live to living with some of them. As an example, mechanical heat ventilation recovery allows you to lose less heat from your building, but it does mean that there's a little bit of a noise of a fan on all the time, which some people find really intrusive. So we're having to work with our customers about the fact that homes of the future will be different and how we can make it as acceptable and as livable as possible. And the cost in use point again is we also need to make sure that the technologies we install, particularly if we're installing things like ventilation that relies on electricity, are affordable to run for people who may be on low incomes. Next slide, please. In terms of customer engagement, I'll just leave those up there for you to have a look at some of the facts that have come out. These are not our research, but there's two very good pieces of research that have been done with housing association customers, one by Place Shapers and TPAS and the other by Orbit Housing. And we need to pick up and do more of this engagement with our own customers, learning from their journeys. You know, many residents are not quite sure what net zero carbon means. People are not quite sure how it's going to affect them. But we do know that particularly with rising gas prices, rising oil prices, rising electricity prices, and the other sort of wider changes in society, that a lot of our customers are struggling to afford their heating, and that's a real pressure alongside the net zero conversation. Next slide, please. In terms of other climate issues, we are already starting to think about planning for climate adaptation. We're aware that a lot of our houses, our homes have experienced flooding from water runoff at a higher rate in recent years than would have happened in the past. We need to be looking at the potential not only for flooding, but for land movements and which parts of the forest are most at risk and how we can support our customers. We own a certain amount of open spaces. So as we build new homes and as we work on the land we already own, we're looking to increase biodiversity and to consult our tenants on options around changing our grass cutting measures, for example. So instead of mowed lawn all over the place, we can introduce more meadows. Yes, it's small. Planting trees isn't going to save the planet, but actually we can improve local areas, increase biodiversity in local areas by looking at what we can do at a very hyper-local level. And that might include more space for food production. Certainly if communities want to use any of our space in different ways, we're really up for that conversation. Our offices are already very green. They were designed and built 8 years ago to a very high standard, but we do a lot of travel as an organisation. It's a very rural area. So we're looking at how we green our fleet, really interested as the forest becomes, as electric charging becomes more available in the office, that then opens up opportunities for businesses such as ours. COVID has allowed us to reduce travel really significantly. And one of the things I'm looking at now is how we report these different things that we're doing in a way that's transparent for our customers and our peers and other organisations to engage with us, because we need that challenge as to, are we going far enough and what more could we be doing? Is that the last one? Yes, thank you. Summary, really, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a housing provider, but as a homeowner or as a tenant, we're all going to be facing challenges around the amount of emissions that our homes release into the environment. And I think that there's scope for this climate emergency group to learn from each other and work together on looking at how we can deploy some of those solutions. Really interested in the idea about working with energy providers with some of our rural communities. How can we bring some of the pieces of the puzzle together to support communities to make those hyper-local changes? Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's a brilliant presentation and well worth listening to. I do note that we're running probably about 10 minutes over. I'm going to give Tim a chance to present his biodiversity report, as it were. But I'm going to ask everyone if you're able to and you're happy to maybe just extend the time that you're in this event to about 12:40, so that we get a good chance to hear the presentations, and also sort out the breakout rooms. That's just a request. Obviously, if you have other things to do, then you'll leave at 12:30, but we'll try and increase the pace and without harming the quality, as it were. Okay, Tim, the floor's yours. 5 minutes, if you can, on biodiversity.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. And please would you welcome my young assistant here, Michael Dunwell, who I'm delighted to have here. COP26 gave us a classic example of the art of the possible, and to have expected more from concerted action on a global scale would have been to crave the improbable, most likely the impossible. I believe almost everything is enacted at a local level, however remote the initial force. And at a local level, we act more speedily and responsively to local needs. So while as far as COP26 is concerned, grassroots volunteers may be bottom feeders, we remain a critical part of the process. We're all connected, whether we're perceived top down or bottoms up. Now you'll notice I don't have any slides. Michael is my human slide here, but my first slide would be an amplification of what Kevin was talking about earlier, which he mentioned in passing. This is nature networks or wildlife corridors. And I would like to add something about his splendid and ambitious 7 treescapes scheme. I hope that's all right, Kevin. Thank you. I want you, this is my slide. I would like you to imagine a landscape stretching from Wales and the Beacons through the deep forest, through here, the Golden Triangle, past the Malverns and moving north up to the Wire. That is my first slide, and that's our wildlife corridor. My colleague, Chris Bly of Dymock Forest Rural Action and I have been visiting our parish councils in the Leaden Vale and Dean Ridges over the last few months. We've been asking them to adopt a biodiversity resolution. We always include in our presentation now mention of 7 treescapes because the corridor runs through the area from which I'm speaking. That's roughly the Golden Triangle, straddled between the Severn and the Wye, and famous for its ancient woodland and wild daffodils. This is where DIFRA's work has been concentrated over many years. That the corridor runs through these northern forest parishes has given the concept of local biodiversity a far wider context, and we're encouraged that 6 parish councils have now unanimously adopted the biodiversity resolution. However, there are gaps in the corridor up here. To create a proper functioning ecosystem, we need a mosaic of more permeable farmland, combined with wetland, grassland, heathland, and joined up areas of woodland. A significant development which may help to achieve this ambition is Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust's new scheme involving farmers and landowners in our North Forest region. Their test and trial is designed to identify what incentives and actions are needed to make innovative change and eventually close those critical gaps in our landscape. This research will be reported to DEFRA and influence future land recovery policy. Chris Bly and I are working with the Trust, engaging farmers to help get the project underway. So DEFRA, Forestry England, and the Wildlife Trust all appear to be working in harmony to the same end at their appropriate level. All across our forest parishes, there are encouraging, though admittedly early signs of grassroots cooperative activity. This is led by members of the Forest Climate Group, a non-partisan forum for town and parish councillors and interlopers like me, which meets regularly to exchange ideas and to report what's happening in the region. I'd urge any councillors here not already involved to join the group, which is coordinated by Jackie Dale and run on Zoom. I'd also like to mention the Transition Network. There are now over 300 transition groups in the UK. One of the earliest is based around Newent, where it has had considerable influence at grassroots level over the last decade. The movement has evolved. It is scarcely recognizable now from the early days when the prevailing concern was peak oil and the perceived need to adapt to a world with dwindling fossil fuel reserves. Transition Nuent has nearly 300 subscribers to its regular newsletter and a hardcore of 30 or so members actively sharing a wide range of experience and expertise. The movement has spawned any number of local initiatives concerned with food, transport, and energy, all of which are immediately relevant to carbon reduction and the resilience of our local communities. However, these or those active members represent an aging and relatively privileged demographic. Transition has to constantly reinvent itself to remain relevant to changing times. Like most grassroots organizations, it is sustained only by the energy and commitment of volunteers. The same is true of other movements active locally, such as Extinction Rebellion. This was once a coherent movement, but has inevitably evolved, reflecting essential differences in attitudes towards public engagement. On the one hand, there are those committed to non-violent action, and on the other, those involved in more challenging, disruptive behavior. The difference between these two factions will be hard, if not impossible to reconcile, especially after COP26. To conclude, my gran would say, fine words butter no parsnips, and she was right. There is a sustained mismatch between government rhetoric and the necessary speed of action in response to the challenges we face. I wish us all the best of luck in whatever field or at whatever level we operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And that was, again, another brilliant presentation and so much food for thought that all of the stakeholders here in this event will take home many of those messages that you put out. I'm going to pass back to Daniel, I think, now to do a quick question and answer session. Daniel, are you okay with that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I think we've still got a little bit of time to do a short Q&A. Peter's nodding. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat, but feel free to raise your hand using the reactions menu, or just type your question into the chat and I'll read it out for you. If you can just try and be clear who your question is directed to, that'd be helpful. Go ahead. No questions so far.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm waving.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sorry, didn't see you. Who's this? You're not on my screen.
Kathy Griffiths from Forest Voluntary Action Forum and the local climate change group. Thank you for such brilliant and informative and sobering presentations. I've got so much to learn, and this is really helping me learn. My question is, is about youth engagement. My son has been moved to leave his job and look for work in the environment sector because of these issues. And over the winter, he's going to be a professional tree planter. How can we, given this very clear message that trees alone are not going to save the planet, how can we engage young people in the level of information and knowledge that is needed to create this conversation in plain English to homes across the Forest of Dean? So young people are talking to their parents, their neighbours at school about it, so that it isn't just, driven by us aging people. We know so many young people in the Forest of Dean are really interested, but my concern is that they are overwhelmed or only keying into the thing that they are passionate about, whether it's wildlife or trees. So my question is, how do we help them see the connection between all these issues so they can talk about it with confidence and change ignorance?
Who would like to have a go at trying to answer that? Thanks, Kathy.
You coming to
Kevin?
me? Yep, okay. Yep. It's a very big question, and it comes back to telling the story, because I think we've got, the subject is moving on extremely fast. There is, through social media, Facebook, even the general media, sound bites that are very unhelpful. Deforestation, leading to challenges on an almost daily basis about Forestry England cutting down trees in the Forest of Dean. And that comes back down to basic messaging being wrong. Yes, deforestation of the Amazon and the big, huge tropical forests, and even the northern forests, is bad for biodiversity, bad for carbon. But sustainable woodland management is absolutely key to the future of the planet. And those messages aren't there. Forestry England certainly need to get better at telling that story, but it's more than just soundbite messaging. I think we do have big challenges because through the college sector, they're all governed by national curriculum targets, et cetera, but that stifles or limits the opportunity of getting these sustainability messages in. I have the same problem with my own daughter on a different subject, coconut milk and almond milk. She drinks those because she won't drink milk from a cow because cows fart and that's destroying the planet. Hey, what? But shipping that coconut milk and that almond milk across the world with all the embodied carbon in it, the devastation it is to the native places that are producing that coconut. Oh, come on, having dairy milk from a cow that's on a meadow here. And these are all simple messages. So I don't have the answer to your question. I just completely agree with the question that we've got a fundamental problem of getting away from sound bites to actual knowledge that will help inform and get people to do the right things for the right reasons.
Thanks, Kevin. I've got a question here from Sarah Danson. I think this is for Suzanne, I presume. So how much of the housing retrofit costs are materials and how much is labour? As we get more skilled retrofitters and more demand for materials, surely these costs will reduce significantly. You're on mute at the moment, Suzanne.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. One of the real challenges is that the pace of retrofit is increasing massively, which is a really good thing, and it needs to increase much more and much faster than it is at the moment. But because of that, there is a real shortage of the right kind of skilled labour. We're finding that even in terms of, if I can call it ordinary labour, people who want to come and work as carpenters and plumbers, that there is a shortage, and other housing associations are finding the same. Young people not perhaps choosing to come into those kinds of careers. So we need to work together to make it attractive and convince people to come into this kind of work, because there's a real shortage. And in terms of products, materials, those are also at high cost at the moment because there is such high demand, exacerbated by the fact that, I'm not sure I even dare say the Brexit word, but there are issues around transportation of materials from abroad at present. It will get better. I'm sure it will get better. Demand will increase. We will place longer term contracts. We are going to crack on, but it is making it a challenging environment to work in right now.
Thanks, Suzanne. And Kieran, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, as Diane says, at the moment with Brexit and with COVID restrictions and with lots of us wanting to do DIY on our homes, there is a skills shortage and costs are high across the industry. You know, I was recently working for a council where we had a refurb project on the go and we were struggling to get roof tiles. which was, and we were building a care home essentially, so we were struggling to get a roof put up. So it's really tricky. And coming back to the query earlier around getting young people engaged and having those conversations, as someone put in the chat, I would be very tempted to let them explore it and have that specific interest and try and get them to chat to other groups. I was involved in a green mentoring project many moons ago at the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and I imagine 7Y Energy Agency have got sort of similar programs. And what was really helpful there was getting young people to have specific interests or specific projects and to chat to like-minded individuals, because then they started forming those friendships and started learning by applying rather than just being given books or websites to read through.
Thanks, Kieran. And I'm just going to go to Tim next. I think he had his hand up a moment ago. I might have missed him. Sorry about that, Tim.
Thank you, Dan. It was again in response to what we're doing with the younger people, younger than most of us here, actually. We're a fairly aged bunch, frankly. Dan and Peter, obviously not, young and vibrant. But I wonder whether there are any people here engaged in education who have regular contact with our schools. Because it seems to me, I would like to see far more contact from a very young age. I mean, it doesn't have to be part of a GCSE. This could be starting in primary school. Learning through landscapes, schemes like that are absolutely critical, it seems to me. And if there is anyone from the educational sector, I'd be really interested to hear from them. I mean, personally, my own experience with schools has been with work experience. You can work with a team for a week and do any number of things. I mean, I produced films, we built dams in the Sinai over that period. In a week, you can change a life. And you certainly change attitudes and ideas. So if there is anyone out there, I would be delighted to hear from them. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I don't know if there's anyone from education on the call today, but I mean, from my point of view, I think it is something really important that we need to try and focus on and find a way to get schools engaged. I mean, understandably, it's a very difficult and challenging time for schools at the moment. I mean, they're forever kind of struggling for resources, but kind of the impact of COVID has unfortunately meant that they probably don't have as much time to commit themselves to getting involved in, for example, the Climate Action Partnership that we've set up. But we do intend to try and reach out to them and get them engaged, and they're going to be vital in terms of trying to reach out to harder to reach groups like young people. And if we can get them interested in learning about the environment, learning about climate change, and potentially, they might be then heading off in the direction of working in those fields, and then trying to create those links between education and business within the district as well, so we can keep young people in the district rather than them leaving to find work elsewhere.